I'm Jeff Angel, Executive Director of the Total Environment Centre. Our other co-hosts for this forum is Nature Conservation Council and Birdlife Australia. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Tharawal country in which the Kiama electorate boundaries are predominantly in. I'm also calling from Gadigal country. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and to any First Nations people here today. Now, a few housekeeping things and the outline of today. Firstly, we'd like to welcome Katelin, Tonia and Gareth, who have kindly come onto the forum. Also, Mel and Jay, who are helping run this in the back end, which will be an essential task. The run sheet is there'll be a 2-minute intro from each of the candidates. Then there'll be 3 questions they want to have 1.5 minutes to answer. They've already seen those questions. And then during the session, you're able to submit questions, which Jade and Mel will collate and we'll try to get through all of them. Just to say that those questions you should ask about policies, not personalities. You should make sure it's a question, not a statement, because we want to get through as many as possible. Please address the question to all candidates and keep the chat respectable, and we'll make sure it's an informative and safe place. All participants are on mute because we have so many involved. We are recording the session tonight. The speaker view is in the top right of your screen. For those new to Zoom, you will find the chat button, other function buttons towards the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. You can use the chat function to ask questions throughout the event that you wish to be covered in the Q&A. And as I say, we'll try to get through as many as possible. Share your messages to everyone rather than use the private function. And this will help us see if there are any problems, any major concerns with the software and in the electorate. After the candidates give a response to a question, you can use the reaction function to show your opinion regarding the answer given. The reactions tab is down the bottom of Zoom, and there are various symbols you can use to interpret it, including thumbs up and thumbs down. We're asking candidates to keep their responses to 1.5 minutes maximum and to the point, so we can cover the most largest range of issues. I'll be giving them a 30-second warning. I'll say 30 seconds. And once they reach time, they will have to finish their remarks. If you go for more than 10 seconds over, our tech people will mute you. So the first part of the forum now is to give the candidates 2 minutes to state their general positions. And we're starting off with Labor's Katelin McInerney. Katelin.
G'day guys, how are you? I'm zooming in tonight from Darawal country in the lands of the Wadi Wadi people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging as well, and our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander guests joining us here tonight. I'm very proud to be here today in front of members of my community and those further abroad as your Labor candidate for Kiama. I put my hand up to be the local member here in Kiama because a little over 2 years ago, my partner and I welcomed our son William to the world. And during those first 2 sleep-deprived years of his life, I was up at all hours of the night worrying about the kind of world he was growing up into. I wanted him to have the same opportunities and experiences that I had growing up, the experiences and opportunities who made me who I am. And certainly growing up here locally in Kiama, I spent my days at the beach, playing sport, hiking our natural environment, enjoying hot summers and predictably cooler winters. But frankly, years of inaction by Liberal governments at both the state and federal level have left our country, our state and our region woefully unprepared for the immediate threat that climate change is posing to our community. I grew worried about the kind of future my son was growing up in, and that he wouldn't be able to enjoy the childhood that I had. So I believe that a new New South Wales Labor government will take the action required to tackle climate change and protect our natural environment, so our kids could enjoy growing up as much as I did and have the same upbringing. I think that good government is about protecting everybody in society. Good government's about protecting our most vulnerable, ensuring our health system is up to scratch, making sure our health education system is able to give everybody in our society the best possible start to life, no matter where you live or how much you earn. I also think that a good government's about protecting our natural environment. And I know that only a good Labor government can be trusted to do that. And look, I'm not going to be here today purporting that to have the perfect solution to all of our problems, or that we'll be able to fix everything overnight. So no matter who forms government, we're going to have a huge task ahead of us. But as a former journalist and community campaigner, I can promise that I won't waste a day doing everything I can to support our region and environment.
Thank you, Katelin. Next is Dr. Tonia Gray for the Greens.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I also would like to acknowledge this was, is, and will always be Aboriginal land. This land was never ceded, and we're working towards truth, treaty and justice as the years progress. I currently live in Berry. I'm a Ward 1 councillor on council as well, and I'm not a career politician, and in fact I'm a professor in the School of Education at Western Sydney University. I'm running because we need more capable women in politics. Our local communities are demanding transparent and honest decision-making. Inappropriate development is a serious threat to our local coastal communities, and the current coalition state government has sidelined local input into the planning decision-making. It's done nothing to address our housing affordability and emergency accommodation, and has widened the inequality gap. We've transitioned way too slowly into renewables. The New South Wales education and health systems are at breaking point. We are hemorrhaging good people. Our youngest and our brightest are the invisible casualties of COVID. They confront uncertainty every day as our cost of living spirals. We've had 11 natural disasters here in the region in 3 years. We've never been in this terrain before. It is something that was once upon a time abstract. It's now real. It's every day. It's here. I have a long tradition to the area. I've lived over 40 years in the Kiama electorate, and I was born in Port Kembla, so I'm very much a steelworker's daughter who knows how hard it is to fight for justice, going through public education under a Whitlam scholarship. I wouldn't be here today if we didn't have a forward-thinking government in those years. So,
Right, our next speaker is Gareth Ward, the now independent for Kiama.
Thank you, Jeff, and it's lovely to see you again. And I know that we've spoken over the years off and on, and thank you to the Nature Conservation Council for hosting tonight. Can I, like my fellow candidates, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we are meeting, and anywhere in New South Wales, wherever you may be, and can I acknowledge Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. Can I also acknowledge my fellow candidates and know the challenges of being a candidate well, and I know that all of us are enjoying the exchanges that we've been having. I think there's about 8 candidates forums across the Kiama electorate, so we're seeing a festival of democracy in the lead up to polling day, which is tremendous. Look, in my inaugural speech to Parliament, I talked about my liberal values, my small L liberal values, and I also talked about being a conservationist. And how important that was to me. And I hope that in my time in Parliament, you don't need to listen to my words, you can see from my actions how I have stood up for the environment. And one of the biggest battles I had against the appalling coal seam gas licences that were left across the state by the former Labor government, given away for very, very, very cheap prices, sprinkled like confetti. And I sought to have those undone in our area in recognition of the impact that CSG mining and exploration can have on areas like ours. And I'm pleased that they no longer exist. That was a difficult fight. It was one that many of us in the community were involved in, and we got that outcome. Through to things like securing investments in our national park at Minamara Rainforest so that people can understand what is so important, why it is so critical that we protect our natural environment. I'm really pleased to make sure that we could enhance that so that every generation can access our rainforest, and also in an accessible way for people with disabilities. And I also stood up as well too to ensure that we could include Katelin in the National Parks Estate, expanding that so that we could preserve that for future generations. And I'm also incredibly supportive of Minister Keen's energy roadmap and shifting to hydrogen, particularly targeting the big emitters so that we can see effective action on climate change. These are the things I've done as an MP. It's not just lip service, it's what I believe.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And I know it's intense, but you've all kept to the timing very well. So we're now going on to 3 questions from the 3 host groups, and the replies are sort of going to be rotated in order. The first question is from Total Environment Centre. The effectiveness of offsets has been criticised by the Audit Office. It is particularly problematic for endangered species like koalas, as it is very difficult to obtain like-for-like habitat in their vicinity. The EDO has also released a report exposing the extent of loopholes in the planning and development laws that are pushing koalas towards extinction through removal of habitat, death by 1,000 cuts. Question: do you oppose using offsets in such situations, and what do you propose to do to close these loopholes? Turning to Tonia for 1.5 minutes.
Okay, let's go quickly then. Yes, it's severely broken. The New South Wales Auditor General reported that biodiversity gains made through offsetting under the BCA will not be sufficient to offset the losses. He said that the implementation has to be transparent, it lacks integrity, and it's not sustainable. The protective measures are so bad that in New South Wales, we have the worst extinction rate in the country. Let's not mince our words here, folks. We are fueling an extinction crisis, and it's worsening under the climate crisis. Against this backdrop, we have an LNP coalition that holds the environment in such contempt that they don't even play by the rules. For instance, getting biodiversity assets from already protected land as you smash the rarest woodlands and koala habitats for development. This is simply unacceptable. Our Greens policies will prohibit land clearing of core koala habitat across all, sorry, was that it, Jeff?
30 seconds.
Right, against all land tenures, prevent market-based trading mechanisms such as biodiversity banking and offsets being used to trade off high conservation areas for development, establish planning laws consistent with the conservation of biodiversity and ecological sustainable development principles, and lastly, an independent national ecological sustainability authority to enforce the national environment laws. Thank you.
Tonia. Next, we have Gareth to answer that question.
Thanks, Jeff. Look, I certainly agree with something that Tonia said, and that's in relation to planning reform. I think that if you look at the EP&A Act from 1974, it's a much different document today than it was then. And anyone who's worked in the system knows it's confusing. So I certainly agree with that. But let's just go to the issue. And I think whilst people often are great problem finders, we've got to look to solutions. And in that report that was referenced in the question, there are 11 recommendations that focused on the long-term strategic plan for the scheme, the improvements to the operation and transparency of the market and credit supply frameworks to ensure the financial and ecological sustainability of biodiversity stewardship sites, and also enhanced public reporting and data management, resolving issues in conflicting governance and oversight. So I actually think that what the government should be doing is implementing those recommendations to ensure that we can improve the scheme and get better outcomes for our ecology, for our environment, for our biodiversity, and for sustainability.
Thank you, Gareth. Short one. Next, moving to Labor's Katelin McInerney.
McInerney.
If you couldn't get McInerney right in Kiama, Gareth, you'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't you?
That's exactly right.
Look, just to echo both Tonia and Gareth, we know we have a biodiversity crisis in New South Wales, and the tool that the government has been fundamentally relying on is absolutely broken. New South Wales Labor was a party to a parliamentary inquiry into biodiversity credits, and one of the things that our Environment Shadow Minister Penny Sharp has committed New South Wales Labor to is that we back those findings and those recommendations. There were 19 recommendations, and those will be addressed if a New South Wales Labor government is elected. So we agree absolutely there are serious problems, including the offsets that were promised but never delivered, the double dipping on already protected land, and obviously the conflict of interest concerns that have to be addressed by New South Wales government. So if we are elected, we will require those 19 recommendations be reviewed as part of the very long overdue review of the Biodiversity Conservation Act. So these recommendations included things like establishing clear thresholds for when offsets should not be permitted for ecosystems and species that were so threatened that damage to their habitat was basically impossible to offset. So I just want to specifically talk about koalas, though. In relation to protecting koalas, New South Wales Labor has committed to making a koala park in southwest Sydney a reality within 3 years, so in the first term of government, rather than the 17 years proposed by the state Liberal government under a major development policy, which is the Cumberland Plain Conservation Plan. So we'll bring that online faster to make sure those populations are protected. Certainly, it's a huge one for me.
Thank you, Katelin. Next question is from Birdlife Australia. Swift parrots are one of the most threatened birds in Australia, with an estimated wild population of only 750. The main threat to their survival is habitat destruction. The south coast of New South Wales is one of their most important habitats. After being extensively damaged by the Black Summer bushfires, it still continues to be extensively logged. Unless decisive action is taken to prevent further destruction of their forest homes, the species faces extinction within the next 20 years. Should you be elected, will you commit to ending native forest operations within swift parrot and other threatened species habitats? Going firstly to Gareth.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to the great team at Birdlife Australia for the wonderful work you do. I think we've just got to drill down a little bit onto the reasons why we're seeing this species fade away. And one of the things that I think needs to be acknowledged is the impact that sugar gliders have on the parrot. Obviously, the bird's being listed as endangered due to the primary threat being habitat loss, which was acknowledged in the question. And look, there's some academics that have said that the sugar gliders risks have increased as that habitat's being destroyed. There's no doubt about that. But those two things aren't mutually exclusive. So I think you've got to look at the impacts of sugar gliders and also the loss of habitat. We know that the swift parrot is listed as a critically endangered species in the EPBC Act, which is the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, which is the federal legislation. And I know that there's been a lot of work, particularly in Tasmania, in relation to timber harvesting prescriptions imposed to moderate the impact of forestry, and that's had varying degrees of success from what I've read. And I know that climate change is obviously another impact as a result of which is compounding all of these things. So look, it's something that I think we need to work harder. It doesn't matter whether it's this particular species or any threatened or endangered species. We need to make sure that we're doing all that we can, using every aspect of government to ensure that we reduce the impact of logging. I met with the Nature Conservation Council, and I was appalled to hear that old growth forests were being logged to make cardboard, which was being exported overseas. I mean, how can we bring that as a principle? But secondly, that has an impact on this endangered species.
You, Gareth. Tonia, and to answer the question about the birds.
So it was me next, was it? Sorry, Jeff, I didn't quite gather.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. I would say yes, that in 2021, the New South Wales Government's State of the Environment report revealed that land clearing in New South Wales has tripled in the past decade. The World WWF reported that 10 million animals a year are estimated to be lost due to New South Wales land clearing laws, such as industrial scale logging. The Greens will work towards ending this broad-scale native vegetation clearing and the incremental loss of native vegetation, such as that which the swift parrot lives in. We will revise and regulate all logging across all land tenures as part of a transition to end logging. Our policy is that all logging operations must be subject to comprehensive environmental impact assessments. 40 seconds, right. We'll invest in the restoration of degraded forest and promote the creation of an environmental restoration and repair industry. And lastly, we'll work towards implementing legislation preventing habitat loss to stop the unacceptable practice of waiting until a species is extinct before it becomes listed as endangered or threatened.
Thank you. The third question is from the Nature Conservation Council.
Sorry,
Sorry, Jeff, do you want me to?
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer that as well. So look, specifically to do with native forestry operations, no, I won't be able to promise that to you tonight. While I do acknowledge and understand the role that swift parrots play in a very complex biodiverse system, and they're very important pollinators as well, what I can promise is that as an elected representative in Kiama, I will fight every day as your local member to ensure that our native species are protected and their habitats are maintained. I've already put my nailed my colours to the mast on that one by making sure Penny Sharp, our Shadow Minister for Environment, is very well aware of the issues facing our protecting biodiverse habitats along our electorate, throughout our electorate, and we've already had great indications from Penny that she's keen to work with local stakeholders and landowners to make that happen. So I strongly believe that our community needs someone who's going to get up to Parliament and take the fight up to government, because that's where we need to be. We really need to be pushing, and it's certainly a lot easier to be advocating within that tent.
Thank you. I seem to be getting ahead of myself. Tonia. Is that right?
No, so we're done with that question now, Jeff.
We're done.
That's all service. Yeah. That's all right. That's all right.
Right. The third question from the NCC. We're in a climate crisis and an energy price crisis. Will you address both by rolling out a household efficiency package? This should include minimum energy efficiency standards for rental properties, solar on community and public housing, and additional rebates to help more households to get off gas and improve the efficiency of their homes and appliances. First to Katelin.
Thanks so much for the question. Look, under the current government, New South Wales has the lowest proportion of household solar panels in Australia. We know that, and of that, only about 1 in 60 solar homes have a battery to store the energy that produce from their panels. So one of the things solar, making it more accessible and affordable, New South Wales Labor's committing to building on federal Labor's commitment to build more community batteries and at scale and quickly to allow homes within a neighbourhood to access stored excess power generated during the day and use that. So that we hope that will make a very big significant difference on the issue of affordability. I just make the point that minimum efficiency standards for rental properties have already been agreed to by the former COAG group as part of the move to low carbon buildings. So that is something that a New South Wales Labor government would be continuing the work of. This government's agreed in principle. We haven't seen any movement on that, but it's certainly something I'm very passionate about, having worked for Better Renting on their Healthy Homes for Renters campaign last year. So the other big thing, of course, is a New South Wales Labor government will put $1 billion into a state-owned corporation that will fast-track renewables to make sure we keep the lights on, particularly when the wind isn't blowing and the sun's not shining.
Thank you. Tonia.
Yes, it'll come as no surprise to these in the audience that the Greens have the most comprehensive policies on climate change and energy efficiency. Our target is 100% clean, renewable electrical energy in New South Wales by 2030 or earlier. We have a number of policies that specifically address this question, including funding for renewable and sustainable energy programs to enable greater access to affordable energy, especially for households facing barriers to installing rooftop PVs and batteries, like those in rental properties, low-income earners, living in apartments, or just the working poor, which we are seeing expanding as a group. We will upgrade the minimum standards for rental housing to include ceiling insulation, roof ventilation, waterproofing, and mandating minimum energy efficiency standards. We'll bring all energy back into the public purse. Coal and gas are making record profits. They're gouging you, the end user, and you're the ones who are least able to afford it. And that's where we'll be putting a lot of our energy into.
Gareth.
Thanks, Jeff. Look, I'm really pleased that New South Wales actually has the most comprehensive and the most ambitious target when it comes to reducing carbon emissions, 70% by 2035. And of course, all parties supported in the Parliament the energy roadmap, which is all about ensuring we have affordable, reliable, but also cleaner sources of electricity. And when I was Parliamentary Secretary for Education, I worked with Minister Stokes, who was the Minister for Education, in relation to the possibilities for utilising all of those rooftops that we have across the school network. And when subsequently the Cooler Classrooms initiative was announced, we ensured that that initiative was backed in with solar energy running that air conditioning, that heating across the school network. And that was a major investment in realising that government can actually have a significant role to play in fixing its own buildings and having a greater impact on reducing emissions. I know also there's been grants in place to help people exchange items for more efficient items, and that's been something that's been introduced by this government, and I'm very, very proud to support that. But I also do support what you've outlined in relation to minimum standards for rental properties. I think when it comes to costs of living, there's a lot of people in rental properties that would like to be able to be more efficient, but just can't afford to. So it's important that we back in initiatives like solar and batteries, and that we support those in public housing, as well as those people in rental properties, so that they can assist with that transition to get off more carbon emitting sources of energy and move to more cleaner, greener forms of energy.
Thank you. So we're now going to move to the questions that have been submitted, and Jade's been furiously sorting them out. I think we'll just go through same order of people as the last question. So the first question is, if you win the election, or I might say hold the balance of power, what measures will you implement to improve accountability and transparency within your electorate? First going to Katelin.
New South Wales Labor has made it clear at a state level that we will end the postcode by postcode dishing out of funding that we've seen proliferate under this state government. I think everything from bushfire relief to funding of EV chargers has come under attack in terms of making sure that everybody, no matter where they're at and who they have voted in as their local representative, has access to that. So we've made the commitment we will end that process. Funding, grants, etc., are a really big part of how we do things in the regions, and we absolutely have to have an arm's length process and let the experts and folks in departments or third parties decide those grant processes for us. So that's something we'll continue with to build on and make sure that those decisions being made are black. But what we can say is New South Wales Labor has been appalled, and I've personally been appalled at this state government's moves to restrict recovery funding for communities, and that certainly is something New South Wales Labor will draw a line under. Me personally, I'm taking a very open book approach to everything that I'm standing for, and that will continue if I'm elected in office.
Thank you. Tonia.
Accountability and transparency, very dear to my heart. Firstly, let's stop the pork barrelling. We know it's gone on both sides of the table here. We need to end the dirty donations given by powerful gambling lobbies, for example. All grants must be merit-based. They must be given to those most in need, and as Katelin said so rightly, not postcode or electorate based. I think when you've been in senior leadership like I have, we know what tools and mechanisms and levers to pull to get transparency and accountability at the leadership table so people are happy with the end product. So you can trust in me to work as hard as I can towards this goal.
Thank you. Gareth.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, I've always been an alacritus supporter of improving transparency and accountability. And you need to look at my speeches in Parliament, particularly when it's come to enhancing the powers of the ICAC, that I've always been one to ensure that we can shine a brighter light into darker areas of public administration. And can I say on that point, I want to see the Audit Office's and the Auditor General's recommendation in relation to ICAC funding delivered. And I think that's absolutely critical to ensuring that the ICAC can hold elected leaders, but also powerful bureaucrats to account. As a member of the crossbench, I'd be working feverishly with my friend and colleagues, Alex Greenwich, Greg Piper and Joe McGurr, to make sure we have a charter in place in relation to transparency and accountability, as we saw back in 1991. I have worked incredibly well with the independents, both prior to being one and also whilst I've been one. And I want to see that absolutely delivered, because I think that's incredibly important, and I'll be continuing to work on that, but also other integrity agencies and making sure that they're getting the support that they need so that they can ensure that those agencies which they oversight are held to account for any decisions that they make. And I also agree with evidence-based, and I did that during my time in the ministry.
Very good. Landcare volunteers do a lot of environmental restoration work, and coordinators help volunteers to be more effective. The current 4-year funding program ends in June 2023. Do you support an extension of funding? I think that's a yes or no answer, really.
Can I start?
Yes, Gareth.
Thank you, Jeff. I actually issued a press release only a couple of weeks ago and sent letters to both the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition, because I was the member of Parliament that actually helped negotiate the first block funding agreement under this government for Landcare. So I passionately believe in the work they do. In fact, I was with Peter Jerkins and Will Armitage just recently, and I was talking to them about what they're doing with Riverwatch. So I've always been a huge supporter of Landcare, and I think it should be bipartisan. I think it's something that we should, that's my dog in the background, if you can hear him, he's very upset with me. I think it's something that all parties should be supporting, and I'm very, very supportive of Landcare and have done so in my actions. I was a member of the Parliamentary Friends of Landcare, founding member, and continue to support them wholeheartedly in our local community.
Okay, thank you. Tonia.
Landcare workers, aren't they? There's the unsung heroes. They're the sort of invisible labour that gets things done around the place. In Berry, where I live, we've got a very strong Landcare. That 4-year cycle doesn't really give us continuity, especially when we're only now 3 months out from finding whether that will be renewed or not. The hallmark of a good government is giving certainty and continuity to these contracts so that people can put good workers in place, good contractors in place, etc., to do the work of that Landcare does around the community. So it's a yes.
Thank you. Now the third question.
I'll finish you off. I'll round out the trio, Jeff.
Oh, God, Katelin, sorry.
Yes, absolutely. The coordinator roles for those in those land care groups are so vital to biodiversity. Unfortunately, we've seen in the latest reports come out that under this 12-year-old government, we have seen the biodiversity across our state really under threat, under deep pressure. We've seen huge explosions in populations of flora and fauna, it's invasive species, and that's certainly something that New South Wales Labor is dedicated to making sure we stop, and that includes everything from making sure we've got funding in an ongoing way and giving land care certainty beyond 4 years, but also into quite specific and urgent projects like the Kosciuszko National Park Brumbies eradication program. So they are things New South Wales Labor is already looking at, and land care always has our support.
Yeah. The loss of endangered vegetation communities at 7 Mile Beach has been immense. Ground land has been cleared for a golf course at Shoalhaven Heads, and we've seen 80 hectares cleared sand mining at 7 Mile Beach. The government's own reports and audits reveal that New South Wales land clearing and biodiversity protection laws are not fit for purpose. What will your party do to stop land clearing and reform the Biodiversity Protection Act? And I think I add, could you give us some specifics rather than just have another inquiry? Going first to Katelin.
Absolutely. I think that we can't afford, we don't have the time to have another inquiry. The inquiries to date have been very clear. As I said, New South Wales Labor's environmental minister's job will be to review that act and to make sure that we address the 19 recommendations made out of that. And we've made that undertaking that we will do that. In terms of 7 Mile, again, Penny Sharp, our Shadow Minister, has been down and heard about this matter. She's across the difficulties with, multiple landowners, businesses, national parks, etc. But look, her view is that we need to work cooperatively with landowners, public councils, farmers, private landowners, but also with Indigenous stakeholders to develop a way through to protect that key habitat. And her view is that it just needs the political will to really drive it forward. So there's partnerships and investments on all types of land and with the Commonwealth Government to meet the objectives of the Threatened Species Action Plan 2022 to 32, and commit to the goal of making sure that there's no new extinctions, which of course is so important to the animals and the flora in that area.
Thank you. Tonia.
Look, I applaud the work of JEPs in this space. And let's just be transparent and honest here, Katelin and Gareth. We were asked this question last week at Shoalhaven Heads. I was the only candidate that actually said no to clearing anything more in the 7 Mile Beach National Park. I will, no matter what, fight to the end for social and environmental justice. So this government's laws have failed to protect biodiversity, as Katelin said. We will create a new generation of environmental laws that establish the rights for nature to better protect endangered species and populations of ecological communities and habitats. We will work towards the end of broad-scale native vegetation clearing, and most importantly, we will ensure compliance and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is, net zero targets and offsets enable companies...
Gareth hasn't answered it.
Gareth, sorry.
I'll be very brief, Jeff. Look, I think that we need to make sure that we focus the efforts of the regulatory instruments on what absolutely counts, and that's ensuring that we preserve the habitat of endangered and threatened species. But it's also an important balance, because I think that that we need to make sure that there is an opportunity to see progress, but at the same time, we need to preserve what's important. So I'm a conservationist, not a protectionist. I think there's a very distinct difference between the two terms. It's important to protect what is valuable, but we also need to recognise where there is opportunities for progress. And I think that needs to be reflected in the action plans that exist, and I think it largely does. I'll obviously have a different opinion on growth and where that's appropriate compared to some people here, but I also passionately believe in ensuring that we protect habitat, and that we also ensure that we protect habitat connected to endangered and threatened species. And I think that this is something that we can potentially all agree on.
Thank you. I'm just going to organise myself. Net zero targets and offsets enable companies to continue with minimal changes to their operations and profitability. What is your view of net zero emission targets which rely on offsets and carbon capture and storage, neither of which actually reduce emissions in the near term? Katelin.
New South Wales Labor doesn't take a view that carbon offsets in carbon capture and storage are going to be part of the mix. Our view is that we have to fast track a move to renewables and to firming power when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. That's why we put the $1 billion into our state-owned energy corporation to fast track that. We've lost 12 years under this government, and the roadmap to lowering emissions that was agreed by both sides of politics has stalled over the last 2 years. So we absolutely have to push harder and faster now to make up for that time. Certainly New South Wales Labor's commitment to legislating net zero by 2050 sets the policy agenda for now. It sets the playing field for investment by businesses now. We've seen an huge uptick in businesses able to come and do business in Australia in that renewable space since the federal government provided policy certainty. And we believe policy certainty is the key to really shoring it up. My big thing is transition. New South Wales Labor's legislation puts people at the heart of this conversation, where we have to move workers and families across into new industries. We've got to shore up our TAFE. We've got to get our funding right back into public schools so that we've got our young folks coming up into the good, clean jobs of the future as the backbone to that fast shift to renewables. And that our targets, which we think are reasonable within the time frame, given that we've lost 12 years at state level and 9 years federally, they're reasonable to get there, but we have to have that policy certainty, and there absolutely needs to be a transition which takes workers in those regional energy zones with us.
Thank you. Jade's actually helping me now. Next one's Gareth.
Thanks, Jeff. Look, I think that the bipartisanism we saw around the government's energy roadmap is incredible, and I'd like to see this space continue the same way that disabilities has largely seen, with all parties working together. New South Wales has the most ambitious target for cutting emissions, 70% by 2035, which is an improvement from the previous target that was set of 2050. And I think that the investments, the $1.2 billion that have been invested in relation to the sector, development and R&D, investments in transition, storage, transmission, is incredibly important. And I think we should recognise also that we're moving at a rapid pace in relation to things like hydrogen, which are also great opportunities. And I know that I was there when Minister Keane announced that the Illawarra would be one of those hydrogen hubs, and we've already seen the first hydrogen bus come to our area. But look, you need to also target the big emitters. There's some very easy wins here by seeing big emitters decarbonise, and we need to make sure that they're resourced and encouraged to do that, and that they recognise that that is the direction the government's going in. So there's market certainty. That's something the state government has provided to its credit that the former federal government did not when it came to actually having an energy guarantee.
Thank you. Next one is from Tonia.
Thanks, Jeff. Look, the greenwashing, the offsets, the carbon storage, etc., has been rampant, and we're seeing more and more greenwashing being done by both Labor and Liberal. At this point, we've got the knowledge, we've got the finance, we've got the technology. What is missing is political will across both sides of the table. So coal and gas, no new coal and gas to be opened in New South Wales. That'd be my number one stipulation. Their goals of 28% by 2030 for the LNP and Labor's 43% are woefully inaccurate as a nation. Likewise, the Greens say we must be net zero by 2035, if not earlier. So as I said in my introduction, we need to turbocharge our actions and our beliefs and values so that we get some real results. Lastly, we're not going to have a habitable planet by 2050 unless we actually move in this space now.
Thank you very much. Next question. Labor has mooted a wind farm at Port Kembla. This will impact on the breeding sites on the islands off Port Kembla. Pelicans and the many migratory birds use these islands. Wind farms are bird killers. US studies have shown for every turbine in an area, there is a decrease in 2 to 3 bird species. What is your stance on wind farms in Port Kembla? I take the 2 to 3, I assume that's not the entire species, but maybe someone will know. Gareth.
Jeff, I think that we need to actually go back to an evidence base here. I'm all in favour of renewables, but I also think that the corridor off the coast where these wind farms will be placed or proposed to be placed, which is on the continental shelf, is a migratory species highway. It doesn't matter whether it's whales or birds. And I haven't seen any evidence or any studies whatsoever to discuss even the impact of this. Now, this is something that the federal government would need to gazette. They're in charge of the renewable energy zones for offshore wind farms. There's been one approved in Victoria that's been announced. And look, I'm all in favour of renewables, but I think that we need to actually study and understand the impact on migratory species and particularly threatened species. And I just have not seen the evidence base as part of this conversation. You've got all of these slick presentations out there from consultants for the company. Just to pick up on something in the question, the proposal is, as I understand it, from Bombo to Culburra at this point, although the company that has floated this proposal is also looking at further wind farms further north, but I think their primary focus is on the southern Illawarra and into the Shoal Havens. So look, the detail's not there, the data's not there. Why aren't we using our scientists and our experts to ensure we have an evidence base before we even talk about this? And that's where I'd be going first.
Thank you. Tonia.
Well, wind farms, as Gareth said, have got both pluses and minuses, but at the end of the day, all of our decision-making processes has to be underpinned by the evidence. So is it going to be floating or fixed? We know there's 2 different types of wind farms. That hasn't been really clear to me at this point in time. Yes, we know it'll be on the continental shelf. Yes, we know so many other countries around the world are using it and actually espousing the brilliance of this type of renewables. So it'll be a balancing act between planet, profit, and people. At the end of the day, where does that triangle come together? I want to see more evidence, and then I'll make my decision based on what I believe is the right outcome.
Thank you. Katelin.
I just make the point that it's not a Labor proposition at this point in time. It's actually an international company who's scoping the area out for a wind farm. It is the as has been pointed out, that will be a federal decision as part of that. Look, I think in the short term, wind farms in particular are a part of the mix that New South Wales Labor will be exploring. I think there are a lot of ways we can move to renewables very quickly and scale up. And those are, for us, for New South Wales Labor, it really is a focus on making sure that renewable power is affordable and accessible to everyone, regardless of income or postcode. So I think when we go back to our plans in the short term, really it is about shoring up, building on the federal Labor's investment in 400 community batteries across the country that capitalise on that rooftop solar, and fast-tracking solar for schools, fast-tracking solar for government businesses or government agencies, etc. as well. That's all a big part of the mix, but we don't purport to have all the answers. That's why we are creating that state-owned renewable body to turbocharge that process, where we bring together business experts, scientists, and those in government and public service to make sure that we are rolling it out as fast as we can, but with in the appropriate space with the right evidence. I think that's quite clear. that we have to have the right solution. And certainly while I'm supportive of wind in the right position, and here where this is a decision 11 years off, I hope that there'll be a lot more companies coming and looking at starting a renewable technologies in our area. I hope that the policy certainty kicks that off.
Thank you. Next question. The mountain bike trail being developed through the National Park along Illawarra Escarpment may create many issues for birdlife, bird colonies and other wildlife. What is your attitude towards building this track, and what protections are needed when building the track for koalas in trees being felled and nesting ground-dwelling birds? How will the issue of plastic pollution and erosion be dealt with? How will motorcyclists be kept off the track? Tonia.
Yes, lots of fabulous questions there, or hypotheticals, but let's just go back to my field is outdoor education. So I take children and students, university students that is, into the bush. There is always this moral dilemma. Are we loving it to death? In other words, by going through it, but with our hiking boots, etc. Are we loving our national parks to death? This could be a similar case with the bike track as well. The koalas in the national park, yet again, must be preserved at all costs. Whatever mechanisms they're going to be putting in place to put this path in situ needs to be subject to the best environmental protection rules possible. That's all I can say at this point in time. Yeah, we just got to, if we're going to do it, you do it right. We need the right toilets out there, etc. There's so many layers of complexity in an argument such as this and an initiative such as this.
Thank you. Katelin.
Look, I have to confess, given that it's not in our electorate, this isn't something that I am as up on as probably I would normally be. So I'm happy to take it on notice. What I would say is I think the current plan, the way that's being looked at, they are trying to tackle some of these issues as part of planning and scoping for it. But as I said, I'm apologising. Given it's outside the electorate, I'm not really able to give a thorough comment. So.
No worries. Gareth.
Yeah, Katelin's right. Look, the focus for this has been mainly Mount Kira, and I understand that the member for Kira, who's the Shadow Health spokesperson, is very supportive of mountain biking. Look, let's just be clear about this. At Mount Kira at the moment, there's a whole bunch of illegal track. Well, they're tracks that have been made that actually haven't been properly tested, that haven't been properly assessed. And I think it's important that if this practice is going to go on, that we actually work with local Aboriginal people primarily, but we also ensure safety, because I don't want to see kids breaking their legs because they're doing a sport they love, but in an area that is popular but potentially not safe. So I think it's important we work with conservationists, local Aboriginal people, and national parks and wildlife to make sure we get the right tracks, because outdoor events like this, encouraging young people to get out and enjoy our natural environment, is actually really important, and it can be a great clean green business as well too. Local businesses can benefit from having in our area. It's great for tourism. I think it's a fantastic opportunity, so long as it's done sensitively. But as I say, you only need to go to Mount Kira at the moment to see it's already happening. And in order to protect the species that were highlighted in the question, is a very good question. I think that we need that partnership. So let's just acknowledge it's occurring. I support Brian Park's comments on this. I think that it requires a partnership.
Thank you. Next question. A rock warbler numbers have declined due to recent bushfires. Fire mitigation practices also impact on this species and others. Will you increase funding in researching the distribution of this vulnerable species? Over to you, Katelin.
Thank you so much for the question. Look, I think the reality of bushfire loss of populations of animals is really only now starting to be understood. And it's certainly an area I know Penny Sharp, being a part-time local on the South Coast, is hugely concerned about. And it's going, I think it's going to be something we'll be looking at. But certainly with the rock warbler specifically, I'm just not able to give a commitment tonight on increasing funding on the distribution of that particular species. But look, I'm happy to have the talk about how we do that locally, what's needed, who we need to partner with, particularly if there's institutions that we need to partner with, because I think that's going to be a huge part of how government can support the regeneration of species going forwards. Is there's lots of research already happening. How can we support that and make sure that's properly funded? But also, where are new gaps that need to be identified, and how can we bring those to the attention of governments looking to fund these kinds of projects? So I'm always happy to be a conduit for that, particularly when it is for something that has been put under so much stress with habitat loss, drought, floods, and bushfires.
Thank you. Gareth.
Yeah, look, the devastation from the bushfires was seen not just in terms of its human impact, but also its impact on habitat and native species. And you wouldn't have seen bushfires like that before because of the impacts of climate change, because of the way in which this bushfire came about. I think the impacts were untold, and that certainly had an impact on the rock wallaby. And I think that, like any endangered or threatened species, governments should be doing what they can to invest into protecting native species. And I'm sure that all three of us, Jeff, would be saying that as particularly a local native species, that we'd be wanting to see that habitat preserved, but also ensuring that we see a growth in its population. And I think all of us would probably be behind that.
Thank you. Tonia.
Yeah, look, it doesn't matter whether it's the rock warbler, the swift parrot, gangs, the glossy black cockatoos. We need to do more in this space. We know that black summer fires actually wiped out 6 million hectares. That some of this landscape is never going to be restored because it was burnt to basically a crisp. We need to do much more in this space. So yes, and when it comes to even down to the fine grained detail, these zombie DAs that are happening and being resurrected 30 years later, they must be subjected to the current environmental laws today in this space before they're allowed to go any further. So I would actually end zombie DAs right here, right now.
Thank you. We have time for one further question, which I am going to expand a little bit. What is your stance on the proposals to clear endangered ecological community Bangladesh sand forest with littoral forest understory on Crown land at Shoalhaven Heads, 7 Mile Beach? And what I'm going to expand is, you can specifically direct your quick answer to that. But do you actually support the clearing of any endangered ecological community? Gareth.
Thanks, Jeff. And look, thanks again for the opportunity to be here tonight. Look, there's a very important balance to strike when it comes to these things. And I know that there's a long history with this particular area. And I know that in particular, the golf club, when it was looking to expand, ensured that it sought a whole bunch of information about the condition of that EEC, and that report supported the proposition that the EEC had been destroyed and didn't have value, and so for that reason that Crown land was able to be used. It wasn't part of the National Parks estate, as I understand it. It was Crown land, and for that reason that expansion took place. Look, my view is that there needs to be a balance. That's a very difficult balance to get. And in that particular instance, I supported the golf club because the evidence base that they had supported their proposition. That doesn't always mean that I'm going to support an applicant. In fact, far from it. I think that there's a balance, and each case needs to be looked at on its merits. And I think people need to understand the detail that was in that very voluminous report that gave support to the proposition that there wasn't a value there, that the value proposition wasn't there. And for that reason, the golf club's DA should be supported. And that was off the back of independent studies and analysis. So that's why I supported that particular proposition.
Tonia.
Back to my comment earlier, we were asked last week about this. I have no trouble standing up and being brave and bold and protecting our endangered species. I said it last Wednesday. I'll say it again today. I've got your back if you're in an area that's fighting anything that's endangered. We will be there. The Greens are the only ones in Parliament who are pushing whoever will be in government, whether it's Liberals or Labor, to turbocharge all of their efforts on environmental protections. So when you go to this polling booth, starting on the 18th of March and beyond, please have an election strategy. And that strategy must clearly outline those who are going to stand up for the environment and deliver, not be absolutely weak and railroaded to the pressures of their major parties, because we know both parties have a lot of pressure and they will wield power wherever they need to ram it through.
All right, last word to Katelin.
Thanks for the question. Look, I don't entirely agree with that sentiment at the end there. I don't think that this is something that New South Wales Labor in particular is not cognizant of. As I said, we've had the Shadow Environment Minister down here. She's been very clear about been made very well aware by some of the folks on here tonight and other folks who've been fighting these conservation battles for a long time, just how important and how once we lose this land, it's gone forever. These are very special pockets of the world and we are custodians of it. So that's the view that I take, and certainly that's the view that I've made sure the minister's been down here to hear that from the locals as well. I certainly don't want to see any of these areas lost, particularly given they support such a wonderful array of animal life. And I will be a very passionate advocate and community advocate to make sure that we are holding on to what we have. And New South Wales Labor, as I said, takes a view that we need to act swiftly to protect the biodiverse ecosystems that we've got left, because they've been under huge pressure under this government. So that's certainly what I can say, and that will be my commitment.
Thank you. We got through all the questions, very good questions. So in closing, I would like to thank Gareth, Tonia and Katelin for their very succinct and quite specific responses. Certainly want to thank Mel and Jade for helping in the back before I lost track of everybody. And thank you all for participating. And let's hope that the next government has strong environment protection policies and actions.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.